Invitations are a funny thing. You ever notice that the more important the event, the more formal the invitation gets? And if we go together after church and we're having a good conversation and one of us says to the other one, hey, how about lunch? Nobody takes it that serious. You can say, no, sorry, I'm busy today. How about next week? Right? Or how about when you call somebody on the phone and you say to yourself, wow, or say to the person you're talking to, you say, how about next Saturday we get together? Let's go for a hike. Hey, Steve, let's go for a hike, right? And if Steve says, sure, that's great. But if he says no, again, I don't take it that serious. But if somebody takes the time to do a formal wedding invitation and put it in that envelope with the RSVP card and mail that to me, when that arrives at my house, I tend to take it a little more seriously, don't I? Especially if it's a close family member. We actually got an invitation to my daughter's wedding, which is always good, right? Because apparently some parents don't. And could you imagine if we had said, you know what, I'm busy that day, I've got to wash my hair. It would have been just a shock for me to respond that way. And when it's a close family member, especially, or a close friend, and they say, would you come? We tend to take it very, very seriously, don't we? Invitations are serious business, actually. And in the context of where Jesus is in Luke chapter 14, he's been invited to the house not just of any old Pharisee, but one of the rulers of the Pharisees. It sounds like he's the guest of honor on that day. And I suspect, quite frankly, that knowing how the Pharisees usually treated Jesus, they thought to themselves, we're going to have a big feast, and we need it to be interesting. We need somebody that's going to spice things up a little bit. So let's invite that Rabbi Jesus. He's controversial. And I suspect that they also thought to themselves, let's set him up and make sure that he says something interesting. Let's have it on the Sabbath, and let's invite somebody that's sick and see what he does. And so the story goes in the early part of Luke chapter 14 that they were sitting around the table and this man was right before Jesus. That's what makes me think they set it up. Because what are the odds that at a big party, that particular one sick person, the whole party is going to end up right in front of Jesus, right? And he looks at him, the scripture says he had dropsy, which we believe is actually retaining water from hard liver or kidney disease. And Jesus looks at the man, and the question is asked, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? He asked the Pharisees that. They're the ones that know the law, after all. And the Pharisees look at him and have no response because they weren't expecting him to set them up. They were expecting to put him on the spot. They just look at him and go, oh. You can picture them whispering to each other, going, how do we say this? I'm not in trouble. And so Jesus heals the man. And then says, which of you, if your son or an ox fell into a well on the Sabbath, wouldn't immediately get them out? Because the law of the Pharisees was you pretty much had to leave them there until the next day. Could you imagine? Little Timmy's in the well. Oh, sorry, it's Sunday. We've got to wait till Monday. Could you imagine? So they had no response because, of course, they wouldn't leave their son or their ox in the well on the Sabbath, even though that's what their law said. God is very interested in our choices. He's very interested in what we do with our lives, with our possessions. And Jesus knows, when he's looking at these Pharisees, that their priorities and God's are often in conflict, just like ours are. And so in Luke chapter 14, starting in verse 12, we see him focusing on two key ideas that allow us to see the difference between God's plans and our plans. God's priorities and our priorities. He looks at, very specifically, how to share and how to respond to an invitation. Doesn't sound that complicated, does it? But we need to look at it together this morning. To begin with, got the next slide, please, Ben? How to share. When I was in public school, we used to have to line up for the water fountain. Some of you maybe remember doing that. And we would get in line, and the rule, of course, was there was no butting in. Right? You couldn't just let your friends in if they came late. They had to go to the end of the line. And one day I was standing in line with my sister, who was in the same grade as I was, and we were waiting for the go to the fountain, and somebody called her, and she wanted to go talk to the person for a second. So she said, can you hold my spot? So, of course, I did. And when she came back was when the problem arose, because she comes back, and of course, the people behind me start complaining, you can't let her in, no butting. But I let her in anyway. So the teacher shows up, says, what's going on? Suddenly I was in trouble. And I was the one that got in line. I got sent to the principal's office. And Mr. Principal Dawkins, who looked like a giant to me, turns out he was 5'3". Okay, but I was little, he was big. Principal Dawkins sits me down in his office, and he's behind the big desk, the big desk that you're like, peeking over top, right? And he proceeds to lecture me for about 10 minutes on being saucy. And I remember thinking, the only sauce I know is applesauce. What do I do? I had no idea what saucy meant. But being a kid, knowing I was in trouble, I nodded my head, said, yes, sir, when it seemed appropriate, and, got sent back to my classroom. But I always remember thinking, this is what happens with kids, right? We're taught how to share, we're taught how to share space, and share possessions, and share everything else. And Jesus takes the time to teach us how to share. And it's interesting, because he's not talking to children, is he? He's talking to lawyers and to religious leaders that are at this party. And he says, I want you to think about who you invite, how you share what you have. He says right to the man who invited him. So not to some guy who was just an aside. He goes to the guy who invited him to the party, the ruler of the Pharisees. When you give a dinner or a banquet, like we're at right now, do not invite your friends, or your brothers, or your relatives, or your rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return, and you be repaid. Now, I don't know about you, but we've talked about this before, I know we have, that it's normal for us to expect that if somebody has us over for dinner, sooner or later we're going to invite them back, right? To our house. We just expect to do that in our society. It's considered polite, isn't it? But Jesus turns it on his head and says, wait a minute, I don't even want you to invite the people that are going to invite you back. I don't think he's saying you can never do that, but it shouldn't be the norm. Because with what we have, with the time we have, he says we should have a different priority. Look where he goes on to say, in verse 13, but when you give a feast, so not just any old meal, but a big feast, a party, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. So who are we supposed to invite? Go to the next slide. The less fortunate. We're supposed to invite those that cannot help themselves. Why are we supposed to do this? Well, Jesus had already taught us to love our enemies, didn't he, back in Luke chapter 6? He said, love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you'll be sons of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. If God is going to bless even our enemies if we invite them, how much more so the less fortunate? But we need to get our priorities straight. Problem with this, I think the reason we don't do this more is we're worried it's going to be awkward. We're afraid it's going to be difficult. Because I don't know about you, I tend to associate with people that are kind of like me, similar social status and similar education and similar, sort of money. Like rich people tend to hang out with rich people, middle class with middle class, poor people with poor people, right? We tend to keep those lines pretty clear. And Jesus is challenging that, saying, I know it might be awkward, but remember this. They too are a child of God. They too are in the image of God. They too have value. And what's more, if you do this, you'll be blessed and receive a reward. Next slide, please. This is God's promise. Blessing and reward. And you say, where's that, Jeff? Where's that in the Bible? It sounds like prosperity stuff. No, that's the promise of Scripture. He says, and you will be blessed if you do this, because they cannot repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. See, God is just. And the thing is, when we care for those less fortunate than themselves, I can tell you, when I go to Elkville, I feel pretty good about what I'm doing there. And anybody else that's been there can say, we kind of wrestle with that. Am I allowed to feel good for doing good, for helping somebody that can't give me anything back? Right. We wrestle with these things, but I think that's part of the blessing. Ralph Waldo Emerson put it this way. He said, it is one of the most beautiful compensations of this life that no person can sincerely try to help another without helping himself. When you really want to help, and you feel good for helping, that's part of what we get, part of what we receive. But another statement I ran across said, you'll never really live until you've done something for somebody who can never repay you. Some of us go through our whole lives going, if I give, somebody should give back. If I invite, they should invite me back. And they're always measuring. Jesus says, no, if you really want to experience life, if you really want to receive God's blessing, invite those who can't pay you back. Help those who can't help themselves and who will never be in a position to give you what you've given them. week we talked about the fact that Jesus is coming back. And what that means is there will be a time when we face Him, and at that judgment, Jesus Himself in Matthew 25 told us what was going to happen in the story of the sheep and the goats. Those who helped those who were less fortunate, He looked at them and He said, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." Those who cared for the less fortunate. And the goats, on the other hand, who cared for themselves and what they could get, He said to them, "Truly, I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me." See, the only difference between the sheep and the goats is what they did and didn't do. When we face the judgment, friends, what would we have done? What's interesting is that Jesus has been talking to the ruler, and of course other people are listening. And look at verse 15. It says, "When one of those who reclined at the table with Him heard these things, he said to him, 'Blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God.'" This guy missed it entirely. Jesus is talking about how to share, and all this guy can see is, we couldn't be there. And he's missed the point that you're supposed to do something with it. And so Jesus looks at him and says, "But a man once gave a great banquet and invited many." We read this story of the banquet. We see at the time for the banquet, He sent His servants to say to those who have been invited, "Come, for everything is now ready." I've been to a lot of big events. I've been to a Brown family meal. And you know what? There was so much food that if a few people had crashed the party, nobody would have noticed. Right? And I don't know about you, but I've never been to a family event of my own or almost anybody else's that wasn't extra food at the end of the day. Usually when we have food prepared for people to come, we prepare extra, don't we? That's how it works. But in Jesus' day, when we prepared a feast, this is how it worked. We'd send a servant out ahead of time to tell everybody, and to invite everybody, rather. We wouldn't even bother doing a formal invitation. We'd actually hire a servant or take one of the servants we already had and say, "Okay, go to these houses and tell them this is the day of the party, this is the day we want you to come," and ask them if they'll come. Okay? And so all the guests that have been invited have already RSVP'd through that servant, "Yes, we'll come on that day when you tell us." Because, of course, they didn't have telephones and all the things we have. So on the day of the feast, the servant would go in again and say, "It's time, the food is ready." This is important because in Jesus' day, they were missing something really important, something really critical that we have in every kitchen in our homes. You know what that was? Refrigeration. Okay? We all have a fridge in our house, don't we? Some place to keep stuff that's extra so that it doesn't just spoil and have to be thrown away. If we're honest, some of it just stays there until it has to be thrown away. But the reality is we all have a fridge. In Jesus' day, there was no refrigeration. So if you said you were coming to a party and they prepared enough food for you to eat, it was critical that you came. Because otherwise there might be extra and it would go to waste. And they didn't want to see that happen. I mean, it's so specific that if you actually check the history records, they had which animal to kill and which type of food, meat specifically to prepare, was based on how many were coming. If you were having 2 to 4 people, you'd have a chicken. If you're having 5 to 8 people, you'd have a duck. 10 to 15 people, you would have lamb. 15 to 35 people, you'd have a sheep. And 35 to 75 people, you'd have steak. You'd have a cow. In other words, the amount and type of meat depends on the number of people who accept. So once the animal's been killed, it has to be eaten quickly or else it's going to go bad. So get this, friends. To back out last minute is considered at the very least rude, if not an outright insult to the host. You said you'd come, and then you don't show up. That's rude and insulting to the host. Ben, can I see the next slide, please? When we talk about how to respond, the first thing we need to understand, Ben, next slide, is how not to respond. We can't respond with excuses or insults. And what do we see? We see 3 excuses, don't we? We know them from the song. I cannot come, I cannot come. What? I bought some land. I bought 5 yoke of oxen. Or for my personal favorite, I've gotten married. Any man in here know that's it? You want to go golfing with me? I have to check with my wife, right? That's what we say. The guy's blaming his wife for the fact he can't show up. Really? I'm sure you checked with the wife when you said yes when the invitation originally went out, didn't you? How many people here, raise your hand if you would ever buy a piece of property without ever seeing it? Huh? I mean, let's run down right now to the real estate office, and based on a single picture that they have on their website, let's buy a piece of property for, I don't know, $100,000. What do you think? Something planned? How many people have ever gone and bought a car sight unseen? They didn't do any research on it, they didn't check the website, they heard of, I don't know, let's say a Ford Focus, and thought to themselves, yeah, I want to buy one of those, so they called up the dealer and said, here's my Visa number, put it on the card. Anybody? I mean, the excuses are ridiculous. They're absolutely absurd when you think about how they're presented. Because the man who bought the land says, I've just bought a piece of property, I've got to go check it out. The guy who's bought 5 yoke of oxen, not just a single cow, but 5 yoke, says, I got to go inspect them now. And of course, as I say, the one that says, I've gotten married, so I can't come. It's not even his wedding day. It's not like there's a conflict. It's just I've gotten married, so I cannot come. It doesn't make sense. What's interesting about how not to respond, as I said, it's an excuse, at the very least, or an insult if we see it the way it's done here in this story, Jesus says. He's making sure it's crystal clear to these Pharisees that you have to respond in a certain way, or there's consequences. Following the excuses, what do we see? The master of the house. Friends, this should terrify you if you think about it, because Jesus is talking about God, right? We get that? It says the master of the house became angry. It is not my idea of a good way to start the day to wake up and look for ways to tick God off. Okay? To upset God on purpose seems like a really stupid thing to do, doesn't it? I mean, it seems absolutely ridiculous that we would do that we would look for some way. God says, would you come to my feast? Would you come to my banquet? We say, sure, I'd love to be there. And then when the time comes and he says, it's time for the banquet, we say, busy. Maybe next time. And yet, don't we do that? Don't we do that with our lives at times? God gets angry. And it says in verse 21 that he calls that same servant who reported to the things to his master, and the master of the house became angry and says to his servant, go quickly to the streets and lanes of the city and bring in the poor and the crippled and blind and lame. The same people we're supposed to share with are the ones that end up getting it all. You see that? The same people we are supposed to share God's blessing with end up being the guests of honor at the banquet. When there's not enough of them, he sent the servant out again. He says, go to the highways and hedges and compel people to come in, that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of these men who were invited shall taste my banquet. Compel them to come? How does God compel people to come? Some of you remember me telling the story of my good friend Bruce Smith. And Bruce was a fellow that I only knew a little bit when I was pastoring the church in his area. But 2 years ago, just after I came here, I got a phone call that he had terminal cancer. And he had told his wife that the only person he talked to was Jeff DeYoung. And I remember thinking, why did he want to talk to me? I'd talked to him 3 or 4 times maybe in my life. But I went to see him. I want to be careful to be clear about this. I don't think God gave him terminal cancer. But God did allow that to happen. And by that happening to him, Bruce looked at me and I walked in the door and I wasn't going to make small talk because the man could barely lift a fork of peas to his mouth when he was trying to eat his dinner when I came in. And I looked at him and I said, Bruce, do you want to know how to have peace with God? Do you want to know how to be at the banquet? Is what I was really asking. And he said, yes, more than anything. And what I know is this, as much as hard things happen, as much as difficult times come, as much as we are tested by illness and by death and by so many things in this life, what I know is this, that God will use those things to draw people to himself. He will use those things to challenge our thinking, to challenge our expectations, to challenge our priorities and get them straight with His, so that we can recognize that we are now among the poor and the lame and the blind. And He will use those things to bring us in. Because at that moment, Bruce said, "More than anything," and he prayed with me, and he was transformed. And within a month, we got a phone call saying, "Guess what? The cancer's gone." And a few months later, he came to visit here in this church. And some months after that, I got to help with his baptism. He will compel people to come. And He will use whatever is necessary. Throughout history, God has used events to correct and to rebuke His children. The Scriptures actually say that the Lord, in Hebrews 12 verse 6, the Lord disciplines those He loves. When our children misbehave, when you have kids and they misbehave, what do? You discipline them to teach them the right way. And you usually use that incident to teach them. Somebody steals, you make them earn the money to pay it back. Right? How much more does God use the events of our lives? But He gives us this warning at the end of this passage, that none of those who were invited and refused shall taste the banquet. So how do you respond? If how we share is with the less fortunate, so we receive God's blessing and repayment, how to respond? We know how not to respond. Don't make excuses or insult God. But how to respond? The answer is very simple. Next slide, please, Ben. You just show up. You say yes to the invitation. When the person, the servant of God, stands before you and says, "Would you like to come?" You say yes. And you show up. That's all it is. It's not complicated. It's not difficult. Except that we have to set aside our priorities and listen to His. We have to choose to share what we have if we're going to receive His blessing. And we have to choose to answer yes when He calls and invites us to the banquet. Because friends, the most important thing that I can tell you this morning is this. The feast has already been prepared. The invitation has come. But there is a time limit. And you must respond when He calls. Would you pray with me?